everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Male Perspective. I am your host, Lana Reid, and today on this day, I have the pleasure of sitting down with a gentleman by the name of Cedric Scott. He is the founder of EDU HUSTLE, and he's got some phenomenal things going on in the entertainment industry that we will hear about shortly. But first and foremost, as I always do, sir, I take a moment to pause, say thank you to you for making time for me today. Time is a gift. Once we give it, we cannot get it back. So I truly appreciate you making time in your day to chat with me. And with that, sir, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Glad to be, here to share the space with you and, just kind of talk to whatever direction we go in. So thanks again for having me.
Awesome. My pleasure. My pleasure. Now, as I was roaming around your website, as I always do to get ready for these shows, I was kind of reading your bio, which is kind of diverse and with some plot twist here. So as we get started today, I was wondering if you could share, I guess, your journey into the classroom and then your journey out of the classroom.
Definitely. I like that terminology, plot twist. I've never actually used. I'm gonna steal that and use it for myself. But yes, I originally actually started out not in education. My bachelor's degree is actually in chemistry. So I did attend an HBCU, Virginia State University, got my 4-year degree in chemistry there, and then returned back home to my hometown of Pittsburgh, where I worked. Actually, my first job was working in microbiology at Quest Diagnostics. So I worked a contract term there and then landed a full-time role actually as a chemist at one of the plants out there. And in that work, I primarily did a lot of work, kind of like fuel industry based sampling. So, coal and oil and tar, some water sampling, stuff like that, and commodities. And then I always knew that I would teach at some point. I'd done a bunch of tutoring, just classmates or even just, youth or, people in my family. So I knew that was going to be a part of, what I did at some point. So I figured, why not do it while I'm still young? So I went ahead and made the pivot from being a chemist into being an educator, which actually took me to the Washington, D.C. area and started my teaching career there in Southeast D.C., teaching primarily third grade math and science. And from that point, kind of matriculated through, kind of the, I guess, education ranks, if you want to call it that, within the DC public system. So I started out teaching, which actually is how I met my wife. We worked at the same school. She's a special educator. And from that school, I was there for a couple of years, ended up shifting to another school where I worked as the elementary enrichment teacher. And I also did all the math intervention at the school as well. And then from there, kept kind of moving up. My next role at the same school there was I was the math instructional coach, and my last school-based role was assistant principal and math instructional coach. It was a kind of a 2-for-1. And then I made that pivot out of the classroom, out of the school setting in general. Once my wife told me that, we were going to be welcoming our first child into the world. So yes, a few years ago, my son now is 3, and I wanted to be present, just what that meant, especially being a Black man. So I wanted to be here with my family, and was fortunate to be able to do so, make the shift into education technology. So doing the different work with, curriculum and, things along those lines, professional learning for teachers. So it's been, I guess 3 years since I made that shift, and I've been working fully remote ever since. So, with the unfortunate events of COVID, and then of course thinking about, the murder and, loss of George Floyd, it all just kind of hit me. And I was like, I gotta be home. So been able to do that ever since. And, it opened up the more creative aspects of myself, my personality, which has enabled me to create these other things like Edu Hustle and, the educational content that I create as well. So.
Awesome. I love it. And I think that's just so beneficial that you get to be home with little man. And that father son bond is phenomenal. But I want to back up because you said you started out as a chemist.
Correct.
And just indulge me because there's a lot of areas in life that I'm very ignorant, and I don't mind saying that I'm ignorant. Uh, when it comes to brothers in that field of chemistry, are there a lot of you gentlemen there or no?
Uh, Not as far as I know. I actually did. I shared something on my LinkedIn, well, on the Edu Hustle LinkedIn page, not too long ago. I'm trying to remember the number, percentage wise, but I did know it. But it's no, it's not a large percentage. And in fact, when I think about even my education in terms of my bachelor's degree, also being that I was at an HBCU, it was really interesting within the chemistry department itself because most of my classmates within my chemistry courses were actually women, Black women. Yeah, I was, there was even a, kind of a small number sample size representation of, other brothers within the space and just within those classes. So it's kind of intriguing to see, but at the same time, I do understand why, representation is important. And I would definitely like to see more of us making, those shifts. But I think that starts pretty early on. But yeah, to answer your question, honestly, when I would tell people, I'm a chemist, I mean, I used to get some interesting
Yes.
kind of looks, like I had two faces or something like that.
Yeah.
And people even ventured to say like, I never met a Black chemist before, and I'm like,
I
me,
was gonna say.
me either until I became one. You know what I mean? And the other people within my circle, and but yeah, it's something that we definitely should dig more into and allow more exploration for our young people.
Yeah, we've got work to do. We've got work to do. I don't know. I remember younger, and there was these like toy kits, to kind of encourage that mindset, the chemistry. I don't know if they're still out there. It's been so long, but we have work to do. But anyways,
Yeah.
let me move around here because I can run my mouth and ask a lot of questions, and we will be here all day if I do that. So let me try to stay focused here. I do want to talk about one more thing. You mentioned you made a post on social media, and I
Sure.
was on your I think it was your Facebook page, and I saw that you made a post. And we are in this time where it's back to school time for
Right.
teachers.
Yes.
And I have always been on the side as being a parent, so I only know that particular side. But you made a post that this is a not necessarily a joyful time. It can be a challenging
Mhm.
time for teachers, and I really didn't never really crossed my mind. But
Yeah.
what are the challenges that teachers face at this time of year?
So, I mean, there's a couple kind of facets and factors to that. Particularly thinking about, and I'll go at it from a couple different lenses. So I think that post was a little bit more kind of prefacing and thinking about educators who were thinking about or planning to, or even working toward making a career shift or pivot
Okay.
and doing something
Okay.
potentially different. Whether that would be still in teaching, but at a different location and what have you, or kind of like what I did, which was making a shift, from being in a school setting, but still in education and doing something relative. And the other kind of idea and aspect around that too, which is still a true thing, is on a broader scale. Well, I'll just take it from the context of weekends for teachers sometimes. So most teachers are aware of something called the Sunday Scaries. If they haven't had them themselves, they may have potentially heard of it. And what that basically is kind of like that drop or that pit that you feel in your stomach, um, to thinking about Monday, going back into your classroom, if it's like difficult. And before, anybody kind of gets to a point of like, well, why don't they just leave? It's a very difficult thing,
Mhm.
where there are a lot of factors that play into being a teacher, that are, outside of just the actual instruction component of it.
Mhm. Mhm.
There's a lot of weight. The teachers wear a lot of different hats.
Mhm.
And there can also be issues. I know working in administration, and also working with different administrators, that there can always be something there too, right? Maybe there's not a great relationship with the principal,
Okay.
which then of course makes your job even more difficult. it's all about building relationships and things like that. But when those things are not in place and you don't feel supported, then it's tough, right?
Gotcha. Okay.
And then also, feeling like you're kind of, I won't say locked into it, but many teachers don't have the kind of situation that I had where I opted and came from another world, whereas most teachers, they go to school for teaching. Like that's what they want to do. And my youngest sister is actually in her second year, and she went to school, to be a teacher.
Okay.
Yes. So, when you have all of those things kind of, at play, thinking about something like the Sunday Scaries, where it's like Monday is rough, just you can kind of imagine the amplification of that whenever you've been out of the building for, we'll say 2 months, right, over the summer. And then now it's like, all right, it's time to get back, to the grindstone. So it's like, the party's over, so which can be like, oh man. And if you don't have a great work environment and things like that, and this is just like any other profession, you may not necessarily be looking forward to, going back. But in many cases, we have families and things like that. You kind of feel like maybe you don't have a choice. So I think that's a lot of it's kind of mindset too, which is kind of tough, to kind of overcome, I would think. But but that's in a roundabout way. Those are the facets, kind of in a nutshell about that.
Okay, so it brings some awareness from the parent perspective to not walk into the classroom complaining about why do I need all of this stuff on the school supply list, because you're already stressed as well. So, all right, okay. Now you mentioned some teachers are transitioning, and especially you with your case, you transition to something else. And the work that you're doing is in this industry called EdTech. And like I said, I'm clueless. I was going to Google it before, so I sounded educated, but then I said, why would I do that? Because I have the man here. So for the lay person, could you kind of break down exactly what that industry, what that all entails?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, so EdTech is short for education technology or educational technology. And it basically just speaks to all parts of the process where technology would be applied in a learning setting, right? So prime example that most people are probably familiar with, especially with the pandemic, all of our kids go home because of, COVID-19. Now they have to learn online.
Gotcha.
Their teachers are essentially doing, Zoom calls similar to what we're doing right here to provide the instruction. All of their assignments are on online platforms where they type in their answers and click submit. But within that, there is essentially an entire industry of people who basically create, support, provide, promote all of those resources that are being used.
Okay.
Right. So, for example, you think about curriculum. In most cases, especially like for me when I was growing up, your curriculum is primarily in a book, right? A physical book. You had your math book, you had your, your writing journals, whatever. It was all you sat at your desk, you did pencil and paper work, that type of thing. Even thinking about like tests, right? We used to take tests on Scantron sheets and bubble it,
the bubbles,
and it would read it. Whereas now, those same assessments, even like, state tests and things like that are administered mostly online. Even essays and things like that. I mean, you think about, in high school, you take the SAT. I took the SAT, it was online. So.
Oh, really?
Yes. From what I can recall, yes. And then even like my, actually, no, not the SAT. My teacher exam, though. There's a exam called the Praxis. And then even like my master's, most of that program primarily was just like, it's online too. And then there's a lot of these platforms that are then created. So thinking about something like curriculum, they take that physical hard copy book, turn it into something digital, and now you can log in and do the same math problems that are in this book online, right? So there's a connection there, because what that opens up more so on kind of like an industry side of things in terms of like work and jobs that people do, is that there's going to be a need for a lot of different things, right? So you have to have people who can, of course, do instruction or teach. So that's one facet of it, but there's even more to where you're talking about taking a curriculum or, some content, and then you end up packaging that so that now becomes a product. In most cases, we're talking about this as a digital product.
Okay.
Somebody has to maintain that, right? Somebody has to, engineers have to build platforms, do coding and all that type of stuff, so that we can have something to log into, so that we can do our work online.
Okay.
You also have salespeople, right? And people who work in more of like customer types of facing roles, where they have to be able to reach out and say, hey, tech support, whoever, the platform's down, I can't access my my students' information, I can't look at their test scores online, all this stuff. And it just continues to kind of go even further in terms of roles and responsibilities. So a lot of these folks, especially when we're talking about EdTech companies in particular, the idea of it is, well, let's use technology to provide some type of solution in the education world. And that's what everybody's essentially doing, right? We can make better curriculum. We can make it more culturally relevant. We can make things more accessible for, our folks who may have different abilities, right? Impairments, all of those things. So that's kind of what the race is for there. And, a lot of companies popping up, but many of the ones that we know, a lot of the, curriculum publishers and printers and things like that, they still exist, but many of them had to kind of shift, adopt, or adjust, in some way with adding some type of technological component, because that's the way of the world now, right?
Okay. So we're not walking onto school campuses, K through 12, and there's this one room where all the books are stored. It's now transitioning to like a digital platform.
I mean, they still have libraries, of course. But the idea,
there's the collection of history books for the kids to sign out for the year, and that room is not there. I just remember that room where all the school books were stored. It's not it's not there
like the
anymore.
book room. So I mean, I would say I can't necessarily speak broad spectrum in like the whole country or the world or anything like that. What I can say is that if that room does still exist, we'll say, right, there is still some type of, well, how do we get this to be virtual, right? What if we're not in the building? How can we offer these online? So that's when you start seeing, your ebooks, even like audiobooks and things like that we engage with. So yeah, I mean, the book's still there. Somebody wrote it, and there's probably a hard copy somewhere. But in the event that we cannot actually get to or access, or there's some issue concerning that hard copy, more than likely you can probably find it digitally too.
Okay. All right. So the kids don't have to carry around 5 books in their backpack. They can, great.
That's
All right. So when it comes to technology, there's this new thing on everybody's lips these days called AI. In your opinion, when it comes to the teacher-student interaction, does it have the ability, the capacity to enhance or create some problems with the whole experience?
Well, I think that this is all kind of fresh. So I think, I see it potentially both ways, where it could be of benefit, and then also could cause maybe, some things to be stirred up. But I think because it's so new, and it's not necessarily AI itself, like I don't know if it's really breached classrooms like that at this point, to be honest. And I know that there were even some districts in states who were even pushing back on the usage of it, and basically, prohibiting the use and access, especially using like either school or district devices. But what I'm seeing with it is a really interesting, I don't want to say change or flip, but I'm trying not to scare anybody, but I read one article that outlined, I think it would maybe been like 15 to 20 jobs that they believe AI will replace, right? Interestingly enough, tutor was on there, not teacher, but tutor. So I was like, well, what does this, what does this really mean? And basically you get to the idea of thinking, if you go into Google and you type in something, it's going to populate, a bunch of websites or resources or whatever related to that. The difference, of course, when you go into AI, and what we're talking about is more of what they call generative, artificial intelligence, which is something that's going to populate and generate like answers for you in like a conversational format, right? So you go in, you put that same question or prompt into, we'll throw out the most popular one right now, ChatGPT. Not necessarily just going to give you a bunch of websites that you can go to and sift through for yourself. It's going to answer your question. Now, I mean, there's always, questions about accuracy and like validity of the responses and things like that. But the idea, I guess, around like the whole teaching component is, you can go in there and have it break down a math problem, right? Or, assist with, English language arts, proofreading and stuff like that. But I think that there is a barrier there where I do personally believe that the human component of the teaching kind of like, dynamic, if you will, is something that, of course, they can't replicate, but at the same time, I just think it's still necessary. Even thinking about, parents, right? Where they would say like parents are your child's first teacher, right? So like that human component of it, is even if it's virtually, is still something that, I think is necessary, and they can't recreate that. So, albeit, I mean, I think that there probably is some attempt to do so. But yeah, within actual classrooms right now, I mean, technology is, being implemented and being used, but yeah, there's still barriers to entry, and I don't know how much, schools and districts will really lean on that particular technology.
As a math teacher in the classroom, reflecting back on your days, would you be able to tell if a student turned in homework that was done by AI? Would you be able to tell?
In mathematics or just in general? Okay.
Just in mathematics.
Well, I think they would have to have some type of like parameters in place to maybe find out. Honestly, I think it'd be really difficult, especially if it was just something that required the student to just produce numerical answers or something like that. It's kind of hard. I mean, just even right now, like you can go into Google and type in a lot of questions and it'll give you the answer, right? But I think the beautiful thing about math is that you can always kind of like push and try to get more. Show me how right? Like that's the whole. If you can't replicate this answer in the process that got you there, then you most likely, I don't want to say that you cheated or whatever, but you most likely got this from somewhere else, or you just took a real good guess. But then I think even going further into it, again, like the human component, like your students usually, like when you're teaching the same kids every single day, like that you're like did you really do this? Like, let's be honest. You know what I mean? And yeah, I just think that there's again, there's ways to really figure those things out. I mean, it's definitely more, I would say, recognizable when you get to like writing and things like that, because you could clearly the language and all that, because I mean at that point you got to be great at prompting the AI itself to produce something that is human. And they do have detection software that you can run things to as well. But I will say though that one of the things that I have also created is a scholarship fund that I've been running for the past couple of years. It's in memory of my mom. I lost my mom when I was 10 years old to breast cancer. So I created a STEM scholarship in her name. And the one concern that I do have related to that, because this is for, students going into college, is potential implications of AI usage to generate those essays, because it is an essay scholarship. So when you get into that, I think it gets a little more sticky. But again, with something like an essay, especially being that I have had enough experience and exposure to some of the AI tools, you can start to recognize and and like say, no, I don't know about this. This seems a little, but again, you don't know those particular students as well. So who knows? But I don't know. At this point, I think we're just all doing the best that we can. But
Okay, we'll have
it's
to see
moving
how
fast.
this all pans out. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're sitting here talking about math, and if the kids can cheat their way through math class, but if they're doing everything correctly, you have created some tools to assist them. I guess this is the younger kids, though, right? You've created a program called Melanated Mathematics,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Could you explain like what is that about and break down the different facets of it?
Of course. So yeah, being, a math educator, having a STEM background, we talked about representation, before, and, just even considering, what we're seeing in schools and what we're not seeing in schools, thinking about things like Black history outside of, the shallow depth that we get through, in February. And then also other things that, honestly, I didn't learn until I got into my late 20s, related to like financial literacy. So what melanated mathematics is math and financial literacy content in the context of Black history and culture.
Okay.
So your question might be, well, what does that look like? Primary example, I know we recently read an article about some justice being done related to Henrietta Lacks,
Yes.
and her multiplying, cancer cells, and how they've had a vast impact on, the medical world and just the world in general. So there's actually a problem in the Melanated Mathematics, I believe it's the grades 3 and 4 workbook, that highlights, Henrietta Lacks and her story, but then also goes into that, the replication of the cells being multiplication problem, right? So, for example, her cells, multiply by, 7 each day. And you have to think, well, how many days or weeks, will it take for it to be this many cells, so on and so forth. So basically looping in, some of that awareness, the history, and then even going into some of the financial literacy components. With that, I actually started with creating kind of like some of the main focal points and concepts that I was, I guess, more so digging into myself, and could speak to related to financial literacy. So I started out, first thing was talking about managing money. So with that, naturally, talk about bank accounts and saving and things like that. But from the perspective of, okay, you're going to put your money into, United One Bank, right? Which is, a Black owned bank, right? But over the course of time, you're going to, make deposits of $100 every month. After 2 years, how much money do you have? So on and so forth, like that. And then also considering things like real estate. My wife and I are actually business partners, technically.
Awesome.
We own our own home, and have done that a couple of times, but also operate, short-term rental.
Awesome.
So looping that in, right? How do we think about presenting real estate types of content material and introducing it to, our children as young as 5 years old? And then the last component so far related to financial literacy is the basics of the stock market. I started learning about it, investing in the market, and even opened up a custodial account for my son. So I figured, why not, again, put this into the same type of context, talk about Black-owned companies that are publicly traded. And then with that, I was able to do a few things related to, again, representation and just the overall promotion and support, where I didn't see it. And one of those things being supporting Black artists. I know you mentioned like the images behind me. These are done by an awesome Black woman who's a digital artist, and she's actually one of the contributors to the imagery in Melanated Mathematics, along with a few other people, including one gentleman, a brother I went to school with in like elementary school, who's actually a professional artist now, and he does really cool like anime style types of art. And for the financial literacy component, he actually created characters for me. And each one of those characters has a financial area of expertise. So the content is also presented, to actually by, little, young people in their own right that look like them, So it's just kind of a full circle thing. And again, a lot of this funneling into the supports for the scholarship. And so I started out with getting proof of concept for melanated mathematics. Initially, I started creating I was doing videos where I would create a problem, do a video, upload it to YouTube, kind of walking through the actual mathematics and solving the problem that I created, which graduated to me creating the workbooks and things, but also teaching the content as well in homeschool co-ops. So primarily in a few Black homeschool co-ops that I joined during the pandemic. They were like, oh, basically the parents teach the classes. So I was like, my son's only, 2 at the time. Maybe, yeah, I think it was just when he was like 18 months, 2 years old. I began, teaching some of the classes and, using the actual content material and sharing it with families in the group. And from there, I was able to get feedback and again, just, the proof of concept to say like, hey, this is decent. This is solid. I think, you have something here. And that gave me, the kind of go ahead and comfort to be like, all right, well, I'm going to stamp it and go with it and sell it.
So needed. I think that is one of the things that really keeps our community behind the ball is this lack of understanding about numbers, finances, and we just don't get an opportunity to put our kids out into the real world with, a strong foundation. So it's very important that you are doing the work that you're doing. Now, I want to ask you something real quick because this stuff is popping in my head here. Because you are a math individual, instructor, teacher, educator. Tell me why, because I'm definitely more seasoned than you.
I think I know what this is.
No. Why did we shift what is this Common Core math stuff? What's the purpose?
I knew, yeah. I had a feeling this was going to happen. So I guess the way I understand it, because I can only speak to, from what I've seen. It was interesting because I think I started my teaching career like when Common Core was still pretty new. But I think the overall kind of emphasis of it was thinking about how there can be more of a common theme in terms of expectations in math. Well, not in math, just across the board, right? In learning. Because if you go from one state to another, right, the learning standards, objectives, and things like that for students in, we'll say, third grade are likely going to vary. So I think the approach was, well, how do we make sure that all of our children across the nation are getting what they need? And there's going to be some, of course, there's a variance and things change, but there's going to be some semblance of like the same type of expectation.
It wasn't there before.
Not that I know of. Of course, I'm new to the education landscape when it comes to I guess where we've been, but because I honestly, and here's the one thing I think people maybe aren't necessarily aware of is number one, everybody didn't adopt Common Core, and number two, there's actually been more states who have been dropping off, moving away from Common Core and going back into doing their own thing. So in terms of curriculum and things like that, it's interesting because again, going back to like even talking about the EdTech thing, if you're going to have a curriculum that is standards based and you want to sell it in, we'll say, a Common Core state, and then you want to sell it in a non-Common Core state, you have to make adjustments to say like, oh, well, this can be used here and here, but you actually also have to prove that, right? Because anything that says Common Core on it, people in non-Common Core states are going to be like, nope. Like, don't even show it to me, right? Because we don't do that over here, right? But yeah, I think to your point, just question wise, I think that was the goal was how do we make something that's going to be common in, a lot of the conversation of it as being college and career ready, right? Those are the buzz terms. And the approach was, well, these are the things that, are going to help our students across the nation be college and career ready. But that I don't think it panned out.
I am a tree hugger. So when I started seeing these people use just paper after paper, I was like, hold on, wait a minute.
Yeah.
You don't have to do all, but I don't know. I just didn't understand shit. But anyways, let me move on.
Yeah.
The work that you're doing, the EdTech and Edu HUSTLE, a lot of it, like I said earlier, has to do with educators transitioning into this new developing field. So for that educator who's been teaching kindergarten for 10 years or third grade English, what actual transferable skills do they have to take into this new wide world?
That's a good question. It's a common one, actually. So when we talk about, transferable skills, a lot of times for teachers in particular who have started and been in the classroom, for the entire, stint of their professional career, it can seem like some of those things that you do every single day are kind of like mundane and they don't have any place anywhere else, which is not true. I'm living proof, and I know a lot of people who have been able to maneuver. So you think about something like, this is a common example I'm just going to throw out. You work with, as a teacher, a lot of different personalities, a lot of different stakeholders. Now, naturally, you were saying in school, like, you don't have customers. It's more of a clientele type of thing.
Okay.
Right. So that right there within itself, right, is client, support, success, customer success, right, which a lot of people are looking into. It's a common thing. To be able to say, like, you have these skill sets, right? Even thinking about, something like, attention to detail and managerial skills, right? When it comes to a lot of these things, a lot of educators find that they actually can do really pretty well as a project manager or something like that, where, you basically have to be, kind of the leader of an orchestra of multiple different things, right? For example, I've done a lot of work, in curriculum, related to like contracting and stuff like that, where I've written curriculum and reviewed it, edited, stuff like that, where typically with something like that, you're going to have someone who is like the project lead, who basically is, disseminating information, and at the same time delegating a lot of tasks. Educators find themselves being able to do that pretty well in a lot of cases, especially if you go into like administration. You're pretty used to having to look at a lot of moving parts at once. So some of those are just quick examples of potential, but I think that a lot of times those things aren't highlighted, and it's not necessarily shared, I think, from the insider perspective, which is what I try to do, and say, like, well, actually, those things that you kind of take for granted in your toolbox are actually really valuable. On top of the fact that, this will be the last thing I'll mention with this, is there's no substitute for the practical knowledge that a teacher would have, especially when it comes to, again, thinking about any of these education or ed tech companies with trying to create and produce and package and sell a product, because you got to think about, well, who are they selling this stuff to? Who is the end user of all this stuff? Right? It's people in the schools. So if you can be on a staff, for example, and have the know-how, right, of what this is going to be, used for, and what the expectation of, a school or a district is, you can say, you know what, this solution is not it. Like, I've been there, and for this demographic, it ain't gonna do it. No. Right. So you can speak to that, and even some of the equity perspective, and say, like, this is not going to sell. This is not, we should rethink this, and then be able to weigh in, with points that are valid, that bring, or will come directly from your expertise and background. Because you got to think about also, especially on the technological front, a lot of folks who are engineers and build websites and platforms, they weren't teachers, right? So they basically need the mindset and the brain of the people who they would be designing this stuff for, to weigh in on it.
So is that part of the work that you do? You assist people in the classroom transition to this new industry?
That is part of it, for sure. And one thing I always try to like leave out there too is a little bit of a caveat is that in terms of Edu Hustle, the mission that I state is help, or I don't want to say helping, I flip that to, I guess, a more powerful word, is guiding educators to maximizing their time, talent, and earning potential. Okay. And that's not necessarily to say that I'm pulling or pushing or trying to get anybody to leave the classroom. To be completely honest with you, in terms of that, I don't necessarily have to like try to get anybody to leave, like, or leave it on their own. Other factors are doing a great job of making that, unfortunately, a lot of people's reality. Mm-hmm. But I also kind of even look at it from the lens of, well, what about the teachers who just want to teach? Because that's essentially what they sign up for. So one of the questions I always ask educators, well, the first question probably is, do you really want to leave the classroom, or do you just want to leave your classroom? Because you can go teach across town if you want, or at another school or whatever, and maybe that environment, maybe that situation is better for you. Whereas a lot of people are just like, I'm burnt out from the work that is this job, so I need something else. And I can offer support and resources for that too. But then on top of that, again, like for people, even right now, we're talking about back to school. I got all my former colleagues and people. My wife actually works virtually, but still at school. And so for me, I'm like, well, how can I support the teachers who are still in the work? And one of the ideas that I had, and added, section on my site, it's like a page dedicated to it, is I go ahead and just share teachers, Amazon wish lists and class projects, like their donors choose and stuff like that. And I don't charge anything for that. I let people know, like, hey, if you have something, if you need support with your classroom, there is literally, a support a classroom tab and page on the Edu Hustle site. So, people are able to go in, just support the classrooms, buy, a pack of pencils or, whatever they need. So yeah, I mean, I'm just all about, ultimately for me, it boils down to, the way that I coin it is educational empowerment, just across the board. How can we help everybody, learn more, and, be their best, and things like that, from, 5-year-old children all the way up to 55-year-old adults. And I mean, that's, the premise of it is just education wise, there's a lot of things that can be done to support in a lot of areas of need, just based on my background and experience and what I've seen. So that's what I try to do.
That's what you are doing. That's what you're doing. Now, you mentioned real quickly before I wrap up and let you go, I've taken more of your time. I'm sorry.
No problem.
But this teacher burnout is real. And here in the United States, teachers leaving in droves is a reality that we are really facing. I want to ask you, what would you say to parents who are having children today, in today's world, who have no other financial resources but to put their children in this K through 12 setting where teachers are leaving, teachers are burning out, teachers are tired, but I want to ensure that my child gets a quality education. Mm-hmm. What would you suggest they do?
So I guess again, I recognize the luxury that I have, being home, but I definitely see, my son, there's a high likelihood that he's going to go to school. Mm-hmm. So, for me, it's more so about like what I'm ingraining in him now, because I know that my son, because of what I'm going to be teaching him and currently teaching him, based on, not even just like the stuff that I've created, but
not everybody has a dad who's a chemist now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's true. Right. So, but I think even, learning more about everything myself, even like, history, because he's going to be probably that kid who like potentially gets sent home because he's going to stand up in the class and be like, nah, my dad said that's wrong. But what I do throw out there a lot, for folks, in our community, maybe don't have the resources or anything like that, can't necessarily, pay for, additional tutoring and that type of thing, is a couple of things. Number one, I guess the first thing would be just try to be as active as possible, in the educational process, and I know a lot of people work and you can't make the PTO meetings and things like that. But just definitely do the best you can as far as like communication and contact, because what I can say is in the school context in particular, the squeaky wheel always gets the oil. So for me, especially being, when I was an administrator, the parents who were at the school raising Cain, whatever, like they came into the office, there was an assurance that we make sure, that we just already know they're coming, right? We already know what's going on. We know we're going to hear from their child needs to get what they need, right? Another layer to that, though, especially when we talk about something like, specialized support services, special education, if you will. I know there's a lot of stigma behind it, and I get it. I completely understand, and if anybody, I guess, needs more information or has, needs, I guess, more in-depth analysis of that, especially for our boys, I would recommend Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu's work, The Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys. In that regard too, there are actual resources in place that I don't necessarily know that or think or know or have seen be emphasized or highlighted for a lot of families. So there are a lot of educational advocates, to where if you feel like your child is not getting their needs met, you can't reach out. There's different agencies, and I think it's more of a state basis type of thing. But I know I've sat down with enough of them, right?
I know they're there.
So to be like, look, this, we're going to iron this out. This child needs this, the parent, whatever. And I think one of the best things that can be done outside of those things is honestly trying to establish, the best possible relationship, with a teacher as you can, because at the end of the day, albeit the teachers have a lot of things kind of raining down on them. Generally, I'll say generally, because I don't want to can't say this for everybody, but generally the teachers are there, and they're kind of like following the lead of the administration and things like that in the district, doing what they're told. But at the end of the day, they generally care about, the students that they're teaching. Can't say that for everybody, just saying, but in my experience, so that they will, I think, go a little bit more, a little bit deeper, right, in terms of just supports in general, and providing whatever they can for their students. And again, I would just even consider what else can we add, or what else can we do, that might not necessarily be in the school context. And again, I know people have limited time, but what community organizations, what do we have at our disposal around us? Do you have big brothers, big sisters, or any of those types of programs where they might add something else? And I think along with that too, I kind of take some accountability and say, well, if there's not a mentorship program or something like that, like who's to say I couldn't be the person to step in and create something like that? Again, because everybody, we commonly hear, it takes a village, it takes a village. But the idea is of, well, how active are we working to create that village, right? And I've seen it work amazingly in, the homeschool co-ops that I mentioned. Like, man, it's like they do amazing work. It's just collaboration wise, but I just think that can be done, even from a school context. But yeah, definitely, I guess, show up as much as possible. Yeah, it's because, I mean, honestly, even though they might be like, you're like,
here they come again. Here they
this
come
mom or dad. But for me, it was like, at the end of the day, I'm like, I appreciated that, and I was actually happy to have the headache, because I'm like, yeah, keep being a thorn in my side, because that's the only way it's going to happen, right? That's the only way that you're going to get what it is that you need and what it is that your child needs, especially when it comes to our community. When I see the Black families come in,
Come
come on,
on here. Come on. Let's
let's
sit
have a
down. Let's
seat.
work this
Let's
out
go.
here.
Yeah, and you know, and again, that I think that speaks to even consideration for like representation aspect of it. You mentioned how many brothers are in chemistry, and I can't necessarily give you that number, but I can tell you that less than 2% of teachers are Black men.
Mm-hmm.
So, even thinking about that, right? How do we build
Bring
there,
those numbers up.
right? So yeah, I mean, work to do, but I just know the school situation is tough, and a lot of people can't
It
necessarily do.
changed so quick. I
Yeah.
mean, it just shifted so quickly. I mean, and the reality is, what are we going to do without the K through 12 public education system in the United States? I mean, it supports so many of our youth. So where do they go if it just kind of implodes on itself? I don't know. Well, okay, one more question, and then I'm going to ask you my random question.
Yep.
Let's say little man gets to that 7, 8 year old, and he's like, Dad, I don't need you anymore. I don't want to be bothered with you. I'm tired of hanging out with you every day. What would have to change in the school setting for you to say, you know what, I think I want to go back?
You mean for myself to go back working into the school setting? That's a tough one. It's not that anything would have to change per se. You know what I mean? I just think at this point, because I've had colleagues reach out like, "You're gonna come back? We want you to be principal." And I'm like, I'm finding that I don't necessarily have to be in an actual school setting to have an impact on education, which I found, to be really empowering. So, and I never say never, but I don't necessarily know or see myself, I think formally being a teacher or administrator in school. But what I do see definitely is, partnership and still being, engaged and present in schools, right? Whether that's through mathematics or, going in and supporting and, helping out whatever I can, creating programming. And even most recently, I've been doing, I've done several different kind of like engagements and kind of like mentorship programming involvement with some of the primarily HBCUs I've talked to, where they have actual programs in the education department that are aligned to supporting Black men moving into the space. So talking about it from that lens where I can, not necessarily have to be like, reaching just one classroom or one school, but how can I broaden that perspective and reach the people who are going to reach, multiple, right, classrooms and schools, which is ultimately why, I was open to moving into administration and instructional coaching, because it's like, well, if I'm a teacher, it's great. I have my one class, especially, even if I have, multiple grade levels or something like that, I can reach 120 students. That's great. But if I'm at, the head of the school, I can reach 500, right? And then from there, the continuation. So the way I see it now with the work that I'm doing, the work that I do impacts, at this point, thousands of students, things like that related to, what I'm doing in the education and technology industry. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that, if we could set up some sort of system where, you kind of travel around, the traveling teacher, and you go teach, to walk into a classroom, I think, for kids and see my chemistry teacher is Black and I have him for a week, and just the long lasting message that would send to our kids is just phenomenal.
And actually, to that point, I'd be remiss if I didn't actually state this. How I think kind of knew that I was going to end up being a teacher, and why I just wasn't surprised about it, even though it seems like a drastic shift, is I can recall middle school. I had I don't think he was the first Black male teacher I had. I have one who taught music, but the impact of my science teacher in middle school being a Black man, that started it, right? and I was always interested in science. So it was like, oh, I know what this thing is. And he, looks like me and this is cool. And,
There you go.
and I got involved in science fairs and all that type of stuff. And then once I got to 10th grade in high school, my chemistry teacher, since you mentioned it, my chemistry teacher was Black.
Awesome.
That was AP Chemistry 1. So I went on and I was like, you know what? It's like, this is what I want to do in college. And that just trajectory. So for me to become then a chemist and then an educator, my first year of teaching was that science teacher that I had in middle school. It was actually, I was going into the classroom and he was retiring after 31 years. So,
Oh,
it just full circle. So it's just all made sense. So I definitely understand and agree with you 100% about,
see,
walking in and seeing, me as the teacher, like as a whole different,
I
idea.
have possibilities now. I see that. So it's just, oh well, we'll get the kids on to see you and experience you in other ways. But,
Oh yeah, for sure.
all right, let's see what we've got here for the random question here. If you could have an all expenses paid trip, where would you go?
Egypt.
Ah.
Egypt. I mean,
Math, everything there, math, right?
yeah. If I could bounce around Africa, that'd be awesome.
No.
It's all expensive, and you're just going to foot this bill. I'm like, all right, I'm
Yeah, we're
all
just gonna
hard
go,
left.
okay, spend a couple
But
of months and go from country to country. Yeah.
exactly. But definitely Egypt. Of course, the pyramids and
Yeah, they're still
the
saying
mathematics.
aliens built those. It couldn't have been us, aliens built those things,
Oh,
right?
yeah, exactly. So I think that there's so much to that, and I think one of the additional kind of driving factors for me for going there in particular is I actually traveled with my wife. We did a trip, we traveled a couple of times into Europe, but one trip that we did, we actually went to Rome and went to the Vatican. And
Okay.
inside the Vatican, I try to share this with as many people as possible. First before going, it wasn't prompted or anything like that, but I read maybe a few years before Stolen Legacy. And that highlighted things. And I went into the Vatican. Inside the Vatican, they have a museum. And within the museum, they have all these artifacts, which are actually Egyptian artifacts, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I go into one room of the Vatican Museum and I see all the artifacts, all, the sarcophagus that looks like me. I'm like, oh, man, I felt empowered. I was like, this is like, man, at the same time, like, it's here though, which is a problem. I was like, man, well, it makes you feel good looking at this. And then I literally went into the next room and the figurines had the same, body, whatever, and things were changed and the headdress, but the face was
Still look-
changed.
Oh,
No, the face was completely Europeanized. So for me, I'm like, man, Stolen Legacy. I was like, this is the book. So I was like, in one room, and they look like me, and then in the next room,
it's amazing what a little bit of knowledge and understanding, it just opens your eyes and perspective to so many things,
Yeah.
So that's
So-
great. That's great. Phenomenal trip. So we're going to get you to Egypt and you can break down the mathematics of how all of those pyramids were built, because it seems to be a perpetual problem there. Well, sir, tell us how we connect with you, how we pick up your programs. If we have an educator who's trying to transition, just let us know the whole 411.
Of course. So I'm at EDU HUSTLE on most platforms, Instagram. Of course, there's a page on Facebook. I'm available on Facebook as well, Cedric Scott Jr. But probably the easiest way would be just to go to cedricscott.com. That's CEDRICSCOTT.com. And there's links there to actually connect with me directly, or go into any of these crazy facets of things that I've created, from Elevated Mathematics to Edu Hustle, and even the scholarship fund. So yeah, cedricscott.com. And from there, you can get in contact with me or check out what I got going on.
Awesome. Will you be creating any more teaching materials or other things?
Definitely. Always. Always. That's just, being
Mine
home.
is constantly going, huh?
All the time. It's just crazy creative thing. Even the apparel that I'm wearing right now, I created. So it's like, there's always ideas, because there's always, I think, a need for different things and resources. So yeah, and to your point about the whole AI thing, the most recent aspects that I've kind of introduced are actually I went ahead and set up my own chat bots. So if you've gone into ChatGPT and talked to it, I've actually created bots that can respond to you in the same type of fashion on different topics. So I created one for Edu Hustle. So it's actually kind of like almost like a career strategist type of thing.
Ah,
With educators. So if this background experience, like come to your question about a teacher who's been teaching
transferable skills.
kindergarten for 10 years, they can go in there. I've been teaching kindergarten for 10 years. What other jobs can I do? Populate some stuff for you, respond, in the conversation. And then also I created 3 chatbots that are designed to support K-12, not math, not only math, I should say, but K-12 learning. So I created a chatbot for math, similar to what we were talking about before, one for science and one for English language arts, excuse me, or ELA. And basically, to me, that was kind of like I guess like an additional support where I saw a potential use case again for, even as you mentioned before, families who may not necessarily have the means for the resources, and even like in the homeschool sector, where you can have like a homework helper or something like that, and you go and ask it this math question, and it'll break it down. And those are set up to be in child-friendly language as well. So it's like, I can't solve 6 times 8. What do I need to do? And it'll kind of give like a synopsis. It'll break down and say like, well, let's try it this way. So that's most recent. But yeah, I'm always formulating. Always formulating.
I love it. I love it. And you're just such a phenomenal example, because typically speaking, math, science, chemistry has not been I'm so excited for our Black community. So to have an example for our young kids to say, hey, it's interesting, it's exciting, there's a pathway for your future forward. I mean, it's just so phenomenal. So
Appreciate it.
Any plans for a little sister for a little man?
Not at this point. Not at this point. I mean,
No.
and it's funny. I'm actually one of 6 children, and yeah, I look at my dad. Again, we lost our mom early, and I'm the second oldest. So he had to continue that whole process of raising all of us, and I just look at him like, God bless you, man.
I don't know how you did.
Man, yeah, I call him and I say, thank you. I appreciate you,
Awesome.
everything that you, because I'm looking at just my one and I'm like, my goodness.
And you wonder how they didn't have all the things to make life easier that we do. And,
So yeah.
Awesome.
Appreciate your parents out there, everybody.
Yeah, there you go. Well, sir, I appreciate everything that you are doing and everything that you will do. Just the example that you are setting. Just hand claps for little old me in my corner of the world. So keep on being you and doing you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it. That is all for this week's episode of The Male Perspective. I'm your host, Lana Reid, and I will see everybody next time. Oh.